They always said the hottest heat didn't come from the sun. It came from Georgia pavement. That morning, the asphalt outside Monroe Executive Airfield looked hot enough to fry an egg. Jalen Brooks wiped the sweat off his brow with the back of his hand, tossed the empty water cooler jug onto the cart, and kept pushing. He didn't complain, not out loud, because he knew why he was there. It wasn't glamorous. He wasn't logging flight hours or even loading baggage. Jalen was the kid they called when the coffee machine was empty or someone left greasy fingerprints on the glass doors. But he kept his head down, eyes open. Because Jalen didn't just like planes. He understood them. Machines made sense to him, like symphonies made of metal and fuel. Combustion, calibration, precision. It clicked. His late grandfather, Ernest Brooks, used to say, "If you listen close enough, every engine tells you what it needs." After each shift, Jalen would disappear into the far hangar, the one nobody used. Tucked beneath a dusty tarp sat a forgotten 1968 Moonium 20C. It hadn't flown in decades. His grandfather had hauled it up from a Florida auction, but it never left the ground. Still, Jalen was fixing it piece by piece, with the same tools, the same grease-stained notebook, and the same patience his grandfather passed down. It wasn't about flying it, not yet. It was about honoring the man who taught him how to clean carburetors before he could ride a bike. 4 months he'd been at Monroe. No paycheck, just lunch breaks, gas money, and all the discarded parts he could carry home. Jalen didn't mind. He was learning. That day felt like any other, until it didn't. At 11:42 a.m., the terminal doors slammed open. A black SUV rolled across the tarmac like it owned the airfield. Too fast, too loud. Heat shimmered around it like a mirage. The back door flew open, and out stepped a man in a suit sharp enough to slice wind, barking into his phone. Behind him, two assistants scrambled like satellites in orbit. Jalen didn't recognize the man. He didn't have to. You felt when someone important arrived. People moved faster. Voices tightened. "That's Douglas Wexler," one ground crew member muttered. "CEO of Pinnacle Aerotech." Jalen's eyes flicked toward him. He knew the name. Wexler ran one of the biggest aviation tech firms in the country, designed navigation software, owned 5 jets, probably spent more time above the clouds than most did on Earth. Jalen turned back to his task, but his ears stayed sharp. Wexler was pacing now, twitching, checking his watch every 30 seconds. 20 feet away sat his prized Gulfstream G500, the jewel of his fleet, with its underbelly access panel hanging open. A technician crouched beneath it, face twisted in frustration. "We've got a serious electrical fault in the environmental control system," he muttered. "Compressor's not taking power. I got no idea why." Jalen's spine straightened. The voice of experience was back. Ernest Brooks explaining why compressors don't just die. They lose trust in bad connections. "How long?" a staffer asked. The technician shrugged. "Could be a wiring fault. Might take hours. We don't have the part." That's when Wexler exploded. "Hours?" His voice cracked like a whip. "I have a boardroom full of international investors in San Diego in 6 hours. That jet better be in the air in 30 minutes or I'm pulling every contract on this field." The terminal rippled with fear. One assistant whispered into her headset like her life depended on it. Another paced furiously, trying to reach FAA clearance. People scattered like pigeons. But Jalen, he stood still, watching, thinking. He didn't have a badge. He didn't have a title. But he had a memory, a relay, a compressor, a bad splice, a scene under the hood of Grandpa's old truck. Jalen saw it. In his head, the blueprint, the wiring. The jet wasn't broken. It was misunderstood. "Where's the mechanic?" Wexler snapped. Heads turned, then lowered. The certified guy had clocked out hours ago. Food poisoning from a shady diner. Only Jerry was left. Jerry, who wasn't certified for jets, stood clutching a clipboard like it was a life vest. Sir? Jerry stammered. We're trying to get a tech team from Hartsfield-Jackson. Closest ETA is 2 to 3 hours. Wexler looked like he might combust. Jalen, still tucked behind crates in the hangar, clenched his fists. 3 hours? He'd studied the G500's manuals online. Every diagram burned into his brain. Wexler roared, "Do I look like someone who has 3 hours to waste?" Nobody dared answer. One assistant, the woman in tortoiseshell glasses and heels way too expensive for tarmac, stepped forward with an iPad. "Mr. Wexler, we can send for the secondary jet from Dallas. If we launch now—" "No!" Wexler didn't even look at her. "I don't want another plane. I want that one." He pointed at the G500. "It has everything I need. The data, the systems. I don't care if you pull it down the runway by hand. Fix it." Jalen's heart pounded. If the ECS was offline and the compressor wasn't drawing power, that meant two things. Either a faulty relay or degraded wiring near the main control hub. Something that could be bypassed. Something he could fix. He glanced down at his trembling hands, not from fear, from the weight of the moment. Then he saw the chain around his neck, the worn bronze pilot wing Grandpa gave him when he was 10. "Earn this," the old man had said, "not with talk, with work." Jalen stepped forward. "Hey," he called softly to Jerry, who was still fumbling through notes. "Did you check the E36 line for grounding?" Jerry blinked. "What?" Jalen came closer. "If the ECS sensor isn't drawing current, check the lower relay bracket near the cabin stairs. Might be corroded. It's the first place I'd look." Jerry stared. "Kid, what are you—" "I'm talking about your jet not flying because someone missed a corroded splice." Jerry was about to shut him down, but someone else was listening. The assistant with the iPad. She turned, looked at Jalen like he wasn't just some intern in dusty boots. Wexler noticed. His stare turned, sharp, cold, calculating. "You? Who are you?" Jalen swallowed. "Jalen Brooks, sir. I intern here. Part-time. And you think you can fix my jet?" Jalen hesitated. "I think I know where to look. You don't have time to guess. Give me 15 minutes to prove I'm wrong." The assistant leaned in, whispered something. Wexler didn't blink. "You break it, you pay for it." Jalen nodded. "Fair." Jerry stepped aside, or reluctantly, as Jalen dropped to one knee and opened the access panel under the stairs. His hands didn't shake now. They remembered. Copper, burn marks, dust. There. A single loose connector, half-clipped, barely holding. One bad bump, and it would have failed midair. Jalen looked up. "Told you," he whispered, but it wasn't over. Inside the Gulf Stream felt like a sauna. No airflow, just the scent of hot leather and money on edge. Jalen reached in. The connector was oxidized, pin slightly bent, hadn't been seated right in months. Jerry hovered behind him. "You sure?" "No," Jalen muttered. "But if I'm wrong, your jet's still grounded. If I'm right, it flies." He pulled out a screwdriver, his own, initials carved into the side. E.E.B. Ernest Elijah Brooks. He filed the pin, reshaped it, crimped it tight, sealed it with a wrap he'd pocketed earlier from a spare panel kit. It wasn't pretty, but it was right. "Ever done this before?" Jerry asked. "Not on a Gulfstream," Jalen said. "But I fixed a Piper Cherokee once with the same issue. Heat shorts out wires. Doesn't care how rich you are." Still, Jerry whispered, "You ain't certified." Jalen stood. "Nope, I'm not." He locked the hatch and stepped back. Wexler and the assistant watched from 10 yards out, like spectators at a match they didn't bet on. Jalen said nothing. He just nodded. Wexler raised a hand. "Get it started." The assistant waved to the pilot, who'd been pretending not to listen this whole time. He climbed aboard and slid into the cockpit. Wexler stared at him, the kind of look people give when they're not sure if they should be furious or deeply impressed. But Jalen didn't flinch. He didn't shrink back. He'd already spent too much of his life being told he was just something. Just a kid, just the intern, just the guy who cleaned floors. He was done with that. I learned from my grandfather, Jalen added firmly. He did aircraft maintenance for the Air Force. 40 years. Always said the best mechanics weren't the ones with the patch on their shirt. They were the ones who respected the machine. Wexler's eyes scanned him again. What's that around your neck? He asked. Jalen glanced down, fingers instinctively curling around the necklace. He didn't answer immediately, but the assistant stepped forward, her voice soft with recognition. That looks like an old Air Force pilot wing. Jalen nodded once. It was his. He wore it when he taught me engines. Gave it to me the year before he passed. Wexler said nothing. He just stared at the pendant. Not like it was a trinket, but like it was a story he hadn't read yet. Then his gaze shifted toward the Gulf Stream, now fully operational. The diagnostics glowed green on the nearby tablet. He remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he muttered, I've had certified engineers mess up worse than this. Jalen took it as a compliment, though Wexler wasn't finished. Not even close. The CEO didn't speak again right away. He walked slowly around the jet, circling it like he needed to see it with fresh eyes. Or perhaps he just didn't want to face Jalen again until he'd made up his mind. The engines purred. The pilot gave a thumbs up from the cockpit. All diagnostics were clear. Everything was functioning. Jalen stood by, hands at his sides, working to calm his breathing. Not from nerves, as those were gone now, but from adrenaline still thumping in his chest. Then Wexler walked directly up to him. Who signed off on you being here? He asked. Jalen hesitated. No one. Wexler looked toward Jerry. Did you give him permission? Jerry raised both hands. He asked to take a look. I didn't think he'd actually do anything, but he fixed it. Wexler turned back to Jalen. So you just saw the issue, knew what to do, and went for it? Yes, sir. You could have damaged a $50 million aircraft. I know. You could have fried the ECS, caused a critical safety failure. I know that too. You could have lost me an international meeting worth millions. I understand. But Jalen didn't say any of it with arrogance. He said it like someone who'd already played out every possible consequence in his head, fixed what needed fixing, and walked out the other side. Wexler studied him, then looked down at the necklace again. Your grandfather? He was Air Force? Yes, sir. Ernest Brooks. 22 years in aircraft maintenance. He taught me everything I know. Wexler nodded slowly. I recognize those wings. My father was Navy. Different shape, but same meaning. You don't wear those unless you've earned them. Jalen nodded. They stood in silence. Not awkward, but weighty, as if decades of meaning were packed into that one piece of bronze, and both of them could feel it. Then Wexler motioned for Jalen to follow him. Walk with me. Jalen didn't hesitate. They moved side by side across the edge of the tarmac, out of earshot from the staff. The noise, the assistance, still buzzing like background static. I've seen a lot of kids try to impress me, Wexler said. His voice was lower now, quieter. Most show up with degrees they didn't earn, resumes they copied from a buddy, confidence they haven't earned. But you walked in here with grease on your hands and no excuses. Jalen shrugged. Didn't have time for excuses. Wexler smirked. That's the right answer. They stopped near a loading ramp. Wexler leaned casually against the railing. How long have you been working here? 4 months. Unpaid internship. Started sweeping floors. I stick around after hours. Work on an old Mooney in the back hangar. You trying to be a pilot? Jalen shook his head. I'm trying to be the guy they call when the pilot's scared to fly. Wexler raised an eyebrow. That's a hell of a thing to say. It's what my granddad always said. Pilots get medals, but mechanics keep people alive. He liked being in the background. Said if nobody noticed you, it meant you did everything right. Wexler nodded slowly. Sounds like he was a wise man. He was, Jalen said. He didn't add that he still talked to him sometimes, that he still had his old notebook filled with wiring diagrams and thick block letter advice, that sometimes he fixed things just to imagine Ernest Brooks watching from beyond the clouds. Wexler pushed off the railing, turning to face him again. Let me ask you something, Jalen. Why are you working here, unpaid, when you could be making money fixing things somewhere else? Jalen met his gaze. Because here, I get to be close to what I love. The one thing that makes sense no matter what else is going on. Planes don't lie. They don't pretend. They either work or they don't. If something's broken, you fix it. If it's not, you leave it alone. Wexler didn't respond right away. Then a small laugh escaped him, not mocking but recognizing. You remind me of someone I used to be. Jalen said nothing, just listened. Something shifted in Wexler's expression. Something more human, more personal, before he tucked it back behind his CEO demeanor. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a sleek, dark business card. Call this number tomorrow. Ask for Marlene. I want you in Dallas next weekend. No promises yet, but I'd like to see what you can do in a real hangar, with a real team. Paid. Jalen stared at the card. You serious? I don't joke about jets, Wexler said. Or potential. Jalen took the card. His fingers were still stained with grease. He didn't care. I'll be there. Wexler nodded once, then turned and walked toward the aircraft. Jalen stood still for a moment longer, one hand on the business card, and the other wrapped tightly around the bronze wings at his chest. This wasn't the end of the day. It was the beginning of something far bigger than he'd imagined. Back near the jet, the ECS was humming again. Cool air flowed steadily through the cabin vents like the system had never hiccuped at all. The pilot reviewed the diagnostics one more time, then gave the all-clear. Jerry stood off to the side, arms crossed, like he'd just watched a ghost perform open-heart surgery. One of the assistants walked up to Jalen. She handed him a cold bottle of water, her eyes somewhere between awe and disbelief. You really pulled that off, she said under her breath. Jalen unscrewed the cap and took a long drink. Yeah, I guess I did. She stepped in closer. Do you have any idea how many people would have just stood back and waited for an expert? You didn't even flinch. Jalen looked out toward the hangar, then down at his hands. Wasn't the first time I saw something broken, and no one wanted to touch it. Before she could reply, the pilot called from the stairs. We're good to go. Wexler turned to board, but before he vanished inside, he glanced back at Jalen. Just once. It wasn't a nod. It wasn't a smile. It was something deeper. A look that said, I saw you. Then the cabin door closed. The stairs folded up. The engines roared louder now, like they had purpose again. The jet taxied toward the runway. Jerry stepped up beside him. Guess it worked. Jalen didn't respond. His eyes were still locked on the G500, like it carried more than passengers, like it carried possibility. Jerry shook his head slowly. I've been at this airfield 8 years, watched dozens of mechanics come and go. You weren't just lucky. You listened. You belonged under that jet. Jalen allowed a faint smile. I felt like I did. Jerry patted his shoulder. Don't know what's coming next for you, kid, but it ain't mopping floors. They stood in silence as the jet gathered speed, tires screaming against concrete, and lifted gracefully into the hot Georgia sky. Jalen shielded his eyes, watched until it vanished into a blue so wide it almost felt like destiny. Beside him, the assistant approached again. What are you going to do with that card? Jalen pulled it from his pocket, held it up to the light. Just a number, just a name, Marlene, but it felt heavier than anything he'd held all summer. I'm going to call it, he said quietly. She nodded. Good. You should. Jalen didn't reply. He didn't need to. The plane was gone, but the runway still buzzed, not with noise but with charge. He walked back to the hangar alone. The old Mooney M20C waited under its tarp, still untouched, still broken. But something had changed. Jalen walked to its side, laid a hand on the fuselage, and tapped it twice, a habit he'd picked up from his grandfather. "Almost there," he whispered. He sat on the rolling stool, pulled out the notebook, the same one with the blocky handwriting and scribbled diagrams. He flipped to his favorite page, the one with a single phrase written across the top. "Learn the silence before the roar." Jalen read it, then closed the book. Outside, the sun dipped low. Shadows stretched long across the hangar floor. He stayed there a while, letting it all settle. Not everything had changed, but something had. And tomorrow, that card in his pocket might be the key to everything he never thought possible.